can a single human being love God so deeply that our words continue to inspire hearts more than 1,000 years later? Just think about that for a moment. In an age of massive empires, brutal politics, and endless worldly ambition, what does it actually take for one solitary voice to echo across the centuries? And further, can spiritual devotion become a force powerful enough to completely transcend wealth, power, and all that worldly ambition? We often think of history as being shaped by kings and generals with vast armies. But today, we're looking at a figure who literally shaped history from a small, completely unadorned room armed with absolutely nothing but her faith. Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into the epic, emotionally profound, and honestly breathtaking life of Rabi'a al-Adawiyya. She was an 8th century Muslim mystic, an ascetic, and a brilliant poet. But way more than that, she is the woman who transformed the very meaning of devotion, teaching humanity that the absolute highest form of worship isn't rooted in fear at all, but in pure, unadulterated love. Let's get right into it. Chapter 1, From Hardship to Devotion. Okay, so to truly grasp just how revolutionary her teachings were, we really have to understand the incredible, almost unimaginable adversity she rose from. Rabia's story does not begin in privilege, not even close. She was born in the bustling city of Basra somewhere around 714 to 717 CE into extreme, crushing poverty. She was the 4th daughter in her family, and as a child, she was orphaned when a devastating famine swept through the region. Separated from her sisters, her situation went from bad to worse when she was kidnapped and literally sold into slavery. Just think about that level of immense hardship for a second. Yet, from this incredibly dark beginning emerged a spirit of just profound resilience. As a slave, she'd exhaust herself with heavy daytime labor, but at night, she stood in solitary, intense prayer. Eventually gaining her freedom, she retreated to the desert to live a life of extreme asceticism, ultimately passing away in 801 CE as a highly revered saint. So how did she get her freedom? Well, the moment that changed everything for her is literally the stuff of legend. According to historical accounts, one night her master woke up and heard her praying in the dark. She was whispering that her absolute deepest desire was to follow God, but that her status as a slave kept her chained to an earthly master. And as she prayed, her master saw a miraculous divine lamp appear right over her head. The light was so bright it illuminated the entire house. Recognizing this incredible spiritual presence, the undeniable radiance of a saint, he instantly granted her freedom. Which brings us to Chapter 2, The Revolution of Divine Love. This next part is the intellectual and emotional core of her entire legacy. Once she was finally free, Rabia didn't go seeking out worldly comfort to, make up for her past traumas. She sought something entirely different. To understand her path, we've got to talk about Zuhd, which means asceticism. In the early 8th century, the Islamic Empire under the Umayyads was growing incredibly wealthy and, frankly, luxurious. In direct reaction to all this worldliness, a movement of early Sufi ascetics emerged, pushing for a return to a simpler life. Zuhd was a lifestyle defined by strict abstinence from material goods and sensual pleasures. Rabia embraced this wholeheartedly, pulling away from society to focus 100% on her inner spiritual life. Now, what's so fascinating here is how vividly her personal philosophy contrasts with the norms of her day. At that time, Orthodox asceticism was pretty transactional. It was largely driven by fear. Worshippers were motivated by a sheer terror of hellfire or a desire to earn the luxurious rewards of paradise. But Rabia, she completely shattered that framework. Her approach was wildly revolutionary. She introduced the concept of disinterested, unconditional love. She argued that God should be loved purely for his own sake, for his eternal beauty, completely stripped of any self-interest or expectation of a cosmic paycheck. And she didn't just quietly sit in a corner and preach this idea. She made it completely impossible to ignore. Picture this scene for a second. Rabia is running through the busy, dusty streets of ancient Basra. In one hand, she's holding a blazing torch. In the other hand, a heavy bucket of slosh and water. People are stopping in their tracks, staring, totally baffled by what this famously devout woman is doing. When the crowds finally stopped her and asked what on earth she was up to, she delivered this absolute masterpiece of a quote. She said, "I want to pour water into hell and set fire to paradise so that these two veils disappear and nobody worships God out of fear or hope. Wow, just let that breathe for a second. She viewed the terrifying fear of hell and the alluring hope for paradise as literal veils, just distractions that were actually hindering humanity from experiencing a true, unselfish connection with the divine.
Let's move to Chapter 3, Encounters and Rivalries.
As you can imagine, running through the streets trying to metaphorically burn down paradise definitely ruffled a few feathers among the Orthodox religious scholars of the time. Rabia was a total anomaly in the 8th century. She profoundly subverted the traditional gender roles of her era. At a time when marriage was a strict, almost unavoidable social expectation, she flat out refused multiple marriage proposals, saying she simply had no room in her heart for anyone but her divine friend. She lived strictly as an independent, celibate female scholar. And she wasn't just quietly studying by herself. She engaged in fierce, face-to-face philosophical debates with the leading Orthodox male mystics of her era. And spoiler alert, she regularly bested them. Her logic and her raw sincerity were just unmatched. What's so brilliant about her position in society is that she wasn't merely tolerated. She became a highly sought-after spiritual master. Despite living in a deeply patriarchal society that frankly didn't attribute much capacity for complex religious thought to women, legendary male ascetics actively sought her out. They would travel to her humble, empty room to ask for her advice, bringing their thorniest theological questions to a woman who possessed virtually nothing in the material world. There's this one legendary story involving Hassan al-Basri, who was one of the most illustrious and intimidating scholars of that entire era. He famously admitted, "I passed one whole night and day with Rabia speaking of the way and the truth, and it never passed through my mind that I was a man, nor did it occur to her that she was a woman. At the end, when I looked at her, I saw myself as bankrupt and Rabia as truly sincere." I mean, she didn't just challenge gender roles. In the realm of the spirit, she entirely transcended them.
Moving into Chapter 4, Teachings and Poetic Wisdom.
The really crucial point to remember is that Rabia wasn't just a debater or a philosopher of action. She was an absolute master of words. She left behind some of the most beautiful, poignant poetry in all of Islamic mysticism. In her writings, she explored what modern scholars call the phenomenological duality of love. Basically, she identified two distinct types of love happening at the exact same time in the believer's heart. First, there is a passionate, deeply personal longing, a love where your heart is just completely preoccupied. And second, a reverential love that simply acknowledges God's supreme worthiness, totally independent of human emotion. It's loving the divine simply because the divine deserves to be loved. She captured this duality so beautifully in verse. She wrote, "I love you with two loves, a love of passion and a love because you are worthy of that." It's incredibly intimate, isn't it? She's speaking directly to the universe, purifying her heart from petty material needs and cold, rational conclusions, stripping everything back to just this raw, dual state of love. But wait, let's ground this for a second. I want to remind you of the stark physical reality from which this soaring, majestic poetry was actually born. If you looked around her home, you wouldn't see massive shelves of books or fine tapestries. No, her only worldly possessions were a broken jug that she used for drinking and washing, a simple rush mat to sit on, and a literal physical brick that she used as a pillow. That's it. Her immense spiritual wealth was completely mirrored by her absolute physical deprivation. And it's out of that rock-bottom physical poverty that she delivered her most courageous and defining prayer, a fierce, uncompromising rejection of transactional faith. She prayed, "If I adore you out of fear of hell, burn me in hell. If I adore you out of desire for paradise, lock me out of paradise." I mean, it gives you chills. It is one of the most powerful declarations of devotion in human history. She is demanding of herself a love that is utterly, completely pure. And finally, Chapter 5, A Lasting Spiritual Legacy. So how exactly does a solitary, impoverished ascetic from 8th century Basra echo across the centuries? Well, her impact was absolutely monumental. She essentially pioneered the transition of early Sufism from a movement of gloomy, fear-based asceticism into a rich, vibrant tradition of ecstatic love mysticism. Foundational thinkers who came later, like al-Ghazali and Farid al-Dinatar, took her teachings and cemented them into the very core of Islamic mystical thought. She is widely revered as the first true Muslim saint, and her name has become so synonymous with devotion itself that even today, right now, it is customary in many Muslim societies to nickname a deeply pious woman Rabia. Her legacy also physically marks the landscape in a profound way. While she passed away in Basra, Over the centuries, her legend spread so far and wide that a highly revered tomb stands in her honor on the Mount of Olives in Jerusalem, looking out over the Old City. It's a site of deep significance, not just in Islam, but it actually overlaps with Christian and Jewish historical reverence in the region as well. It's an essential place of pilgrimage where the air still hums with the memory of her devotion.
So I really want to leave you with a question today, one that's directly inspired by Rabia's blazing torch and that bucket of water. Take a moment and look inward. If we stripped away all your fears of punishment and all your hopes for a reward, would your devotion still remain? Would you still do the right thing simply because it is right? It's a pretty profound challenge to our modern, often highly transactional way of living.
Rabi'a al-Adawiyya lived a life that taught humanity that faith is absolutely not a business transaction. It is, and always has been, an affair of the heart. I'll leave you with her own words, a poetic testament to a pure, untainted love that continues to shine more than 1,000 years later. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll see you next time.